It's time for Phil Steele, the best in the country, and of course the publications are, here we are at the end of the season, but it's still worth getting the publications if you don't already have it, not only as a collector's item from this 2012 season, but also the pro and the college previews are valuable to you to have as reference material to get ready for next season in college ball and pro ball, and before the new publications from Phil do indeed come out. Also, philsteele.com, Phil's website, is featuring a complete bowl guide. We strongly recommend that you check out Phil's bowl guide at philsteele.com. And there's still time to enter the bowl contest. That also is available to you at philsteele.com. How are you, partner? Merry Christmas.
Hey, Merry Christmas to you, Bruce.
We want to dive into a lot of these bowl games leading up to the big ones, but before we do, I've got to ask you about the Heisman. Manziel winning it, and certainly he was kind of under the radar before that big upset at Alabama.
Yeah, and I think the reason that Manziel actually ended up winning the award was the fact he put up better stats than did Newton or Tebow did. He took on SEC defenses, and really, I think a lot of the Heisman voters, it came down to he did the most at the end, engineering the upset of #1 Alabama. I think Teo was a deserving candidate, clearly, for the award. And Teo, of course, playing for the national championship in the national title game. And, of course, Colin Klein, had he not lost to Baylor, probably would have won the Heisman. So I thought it was a great race between those three, with Manziel coming out on top, Teo coming in second, and Klein third.
And that's exactly the way you voted, is it not?
That's right.
All right, let's take a look at the bowl games. And a little side note before we start diving into these babies with Phil is the names and sponsors of some of these bowls. It is just so new. That's the nicest way I can put it, Phil. The first one we're going to talk about is the famous Idaho Potato Bowl. Some of the bowls, I think we previewed 3 last week, so we'll get to all the others leading up to New Year's Eve. But the famous Idaho Potato Bowl is the first one it's in Idaho. That's all we know about it. But we've got Utah State and Toledo, and interesting matchup. Mac against a team that's only lost 2 games.
Yeah, it should be a good game, and this is the bowl game that used to be called the Humanitarian Bowl. It's played on the blue surface of Boise Stadium, and they've been playing it for a few years. Now, Utah State, as you mentioned, only 2 losses this year, and in both games they missed a field goal at the end against Wisconsin and against BYU and came up just short. Toledo has 3 losses this year, all of them by a touchdown. Now, we're providing a checklist on each of the bowl games to help you follow along a little bit easier, and as you can see on the checklist, with Utah State, they do rate the edge at quarterback, where their quarterback this season, Chucky Keaton, hitting 73% with a 27-9 ratio. Terrence Owens hitting 63% with a 14-8 ratio. Utah State rates the edge at running back, where Kerwin Williams averages 6.4 yards per carry and also had about 400 yards more receiving. Receivers go to Toledo with Reedy at the wide receiver position. Offensive line, a slight edge there to Utah State, which only allowed 4.1% sacks. Defensively, Utah State rates the edges at all 3 areas. They also have the coaching edge because Anderson's got the experience. They're going to have the crowd edge for this because it's out in their neck of the woods. The intangibles, I think, go to Toledo because they haven't lost a bowl game by more than 7 points all year, and they're over a touchdown underdog. Toledo's also taken on the tougher schedule and has a special teams edge. I think Utah State will win it, but I don't think they'll win it by as much as Las Vegas expects.
Do you expect a high-scoring game? I saw an over-under Vegas put out at 58. That may have varied since I got that number.
Yeah, and a lot of these early games tend to go over. That is exactly what the number is right now. And you would think this one would be on the higher scoring side. 2 very fast-paced offenses that can move the football.
Now, Phil mentioned that this Idaho Bowl will favor Utah State because of geographics being so close. So the Utah State student body and alums will be there in force. Same thing applies here in the Beef O'Brady Bowl, which is the next one we're going to talk about. Central Florida Florida. This is in Florida, the Beef O'Brady Bowl. And Central Florida is taking on another MAC school. That's Ball State. Central Florida's a touchdown favorite in this one, Phil.
Yeah, and it's about an hour and a half drive from the UCF campus, so I do think UCF is going to have the crowd edge here. And keep in mind, UCF this season opted to take its probation next year if they get probation, as opposed to this year. So for the UCF players, this may just be their only bowl game for a couple of seasons, giving them a little bit more motivation. Now, as the checklist shows, and as we'll run through it quickly, I think the running backs, a slight edge to UCF. I think Juwan Edwards, excellent running back for Ball State, but Central Florida has three top-notch running backs in Murray, Storm Johnson, and Bryn Harvey. They also rate the edge at wide receiver. So I give a slight edge offensively to UCF. Defensively, large edge here to UCF. They have my number 47 rated defense. Ball State comes in number 98. They're allowing a yard less per carry. And also they rate number 34 in my pass D rankings, whereas Ball State ranks number 106. Coaching, I think Pete Lumbo is a heck of a head coach for Ball State, gets the most out of his team. He's a guy that dots his I's and crosses his T's, but O'Leary's been to bowls before, so I have to give him that edge. The crowd's going to be in Central Florida's favor. And then the matchup, I think Central Florida, which runs the ball better and stops the run better, that's a nice matchup edge to have. Special teams, slight edge to Ball State, schedule, slight edge to Central Florida. Add it all up, I've got Central Florida winning this one by 9.5, or about 10 points, let's say.
61 approximately over-under here. How do you see that?
You know, I could see it either way. I think if it's a game Ball State wins, the game goes over. If it's a game Central Florida wins, actually, I think Central Florida is going to put some points on board. I'm going to go with the over in this one, Bruce. I think it might have about 75, 80 points.
All right, very good. Next one is the Little Caesars Pizza Bowl. This is staged in Detroit, Michigan. This year, Western Kentucky with a 7-5 record against another MAC school. Of course, we already pointed out last week, the MAC with a record 7 bowl invitations. What a feather in the hat for Commissioner John Steinbrecher and all of these schools and the student bodies of the Mid-American Conference. Western Kentucky and Central Michigan in the Little Caesars Pizza Bowl.
Yeah, and tomorrow when the Football Writers All-American team is announced, you're going to find 2 MAC players on that as well. And, of course, getting a MAC in a BCS bowl game is big. Now, I think out of all the bowl games, Bruce, let's be honest, if you look at the teams involved, this is probably the 2 lowest-rated teams in a bowl game. Central Michigan, fortunate to be in a bowl. They were 2-6 at one point, barely got into this bowl game at 6-6, but at least they played better down the stretch. Now, Western Kentucky was playing better ball at the start of the year, but they really tallied off. In fact, in their last 6 games, they lost 4 of them, and the 2 games they won, they basically won by 1 point because against Florida International, they were up by 1. Florida International's punter got tackled. They tacked on a touchdown in the final second. So I think momentum-wise, Central Michigan rates the edge. Now, offensively, I give Central Michigan just the slightest of edges, with that edge coming at the offensive line. They allow 3.7% sacks, Western Kentucky 7.7. Defensively, as you see on the checklist, I've got Western Kentucky favored in all 3 areas. Special teams, once again, Western Kentucky number 28 against number 48. But their coach, Willie Taggart, is off. He's gone to another school, so I'd have to give the coaching edge right now to Central Michigan. The crowd, it's in Michigan. You know, Michigan fans will be rooting for Central Michigan. Central Michigan will travel more fans. So I do give them a crowd edge here. Schedule-wise to Western Kentucky. Add it all up. Western Kentucky is favored, should be favored. I'm going to call for Central Michigan to pull the upset here, though. I think the fact that it's in Michigan, the home crowd, let's hope the MAC gets a couple of these bowl wins. You know, they're actually an underdog in all 7 of those bowls you mentioned, Bruce. So let's hope they pull this one out.
How about 60 or thereabouts for an over-under here?
With Central on the field, I'd have to lean a little bit towards the over, about 65 points, something in that area.
All right, let's go to the Military Bowl, which is being staged in the nation's capital in D.C. The Military Bowl this year featuring another MAC school. It's Bowling Green, and as Phil said, all the MAC schools are underdogs in these bowl games, taking on San Jose State. How do you see this one?
You know, let me ask you a little trivia question here, Bruce, on this year's bowl games. The Sun Belt and you've got the ACC and the Big Ten. If you took the ACC and the Big Ten combined and the Sun Belt and compared the two, which one's favored in more bowl games?
Boy, that doesn't speak well for the Big Ten. Is that what you're leading to?
The Sun Belt is actually... Yeah, the Sun Belt's actually favored in all 4 bowl games. The Big Ten is an underdog in all of their bowl games.
Amazing.
And the ACC is only favored in 2 bowl games. So the ACC, Big Ten combined are favored in 2 bowl games. The Sun Belt is favored in 4 bowl games this year. That's a remarkable stat.
Well,
but let's talk about this Bowling Green San Jose State game.
Before you get into that, Phil, just an observation. That shows you, as we've talked about all season long, the lack of respect that Vegas, the people that put these numbers together, are giving to the 2 of the BCS conferences, namely the ACC and the Big Ten.
Yeah, and the Big East as well is only favored in 1 bowl game. So it's and the thing is about those teams, like the Big Ten, their opponents are far better than the Sun Belt opponents naturally this year. They're taking on SEC teams
in fairness, right,
and some of the upper level teams from other conferences. But yeah, going back to that Military Bowl now, I think it's a good matchup. San Jose State's got David Fales at quarterback. He's a guy that completes 70% of his passes. Large edge at the quarterback spot here to San Jose. Receivers, San Jose once again. Offensive line, I'm actually going to give the edge to BG. They're only allowing 3.2% sacks. San Jose gives up 5.9%. Also, BG averaging a higher yards per carry. Now, defensively, up front, I like BG. Chris Jones, their defensive tackle, is one of the best in the game. But in the back 7, I'm going to give the edge to San Jose State. The crowd, or the turf and climate, I got to give the edge to BG. Washington, D.C., generally when this game is played, it's chilly. I got to think BG players will be better acclimated to the weather than will the San Jose kids. Now, the schedule, that edge goes to San Jose, but here's an extra factor tossed in. McIntyre, the head coach for San Jose, is now the head coach of Colorado. So that's a nice edge for Clausen and company to have. This is another one of those games where the MAC is an underdog, but now due to the coaching change, and if it's about 30 degrees around game time, I give BG, with my number 31 rated defense in the country, a shot at the upset.
So far of these bowl games I'm asking you about today, this is by far the lowest total on the game at approximately 46. Does that make you believe it may be a lower scoring game, thus taking the under?
Yeah, I would have to think it will be a lower scoring game depending on the climate. If it's at all windy, that would, of course, help the defenses. And if you follow BG football this year, their defense has played great. Their offense, not so much. I rate Bowling Green number 100 in the country on offense, number 31 on defense. So BG is an under team. San Jose State's a team with a little more explosive offense, but the winds could affect them if it is windy.
Next game I want to ask Phil about is the Belk Bowl. Yes, I did say Belk. B as in boy, E-L-K. Before I ask you about these 2 teams, what in heaven's name is it's in Charlotte, North Carolina, which I don't think tells us, but what is Belk?
I believe Belk is it's a store, like a Sears or a J.C. Penney's, and it predominates along the East Coast and in the South. So we don't have any Belks up here, but I believe that Belk is a store like that along the coast.
God bless them. It has Duke against Cincinnati. Obviously, Cincinnati was undefeated for a good portion of the season, Phil, and then all of a sudden their dreams of representing the Big East in the BCS fell apart. Duke was a tale of 2 seasons. They had a tremendous first half of the season, and everybody was doubting whether they were legitimate or whether they were a pretender. Second half of the season, they compiled some losses, so I guess it's the latter. But how do you see this matchup, and comment on the 2 seasons of these teams?
Yeah, I think when it comes to Duke, a lot of it had to do with the strength of schedule. You look at the teams they played in the second half of the year. They played Virginia Tech, North Carolina, Florida State, Clemson, Georgia Tech, and Miami of Florida. Basically 6 bowl games in the last 6 weeks, and that's the reason that they only won 1 of those 6 games. Now, Cincinnati, of course, for this game, they actually won 4 of their last 5 games, but they had a shot at the Big East title and didn't get it. Butch Jones, their coach, is off to Tennessee, so I think that gives Duke a large coaching advantage. I think David Cutcliffe's one of the better head coaches out there, always gets the most out of his team, doesn't always have the best talent, but gets the most out of it. Naturally, when you look at the schedule in this game, as we see on the checklist, I give Duke 2.5 check marks on the schedule. They played the number 37 schedule. Cincy playing in the Big East, only the number 83 schedule. And offensively, I think Duke has got the weapons. When you look at their quarterback, Renfrey, and you look at their outstanding receiving core, Crowder and Vernon. Vernon's actually the ACC all-time career-leading receiver. Defensively, a large edge goes to Cincinnati in each of the categories. The crowd, naturally, the game's in North Carolina, so they're going to favor Duke. And here's an interesting aspect. Duke's basketball team isn't playing for 1 week around this game, so even the Cameron Crazies will be here at the game to watch their football team play. And matchup-wise, I like the fact that Cincinnati took on 2 decent passing quarterbacks this year, and in those 2 games, they allowed 502 yards per game. Duke has a quality pass attack. I think this is a game where Duke could pull the upset. I like Duke to possibly pull one of the stunners. They're over a touchdown underdog here, and I like the Blue Devils to pull the upset.
Now, Vegas putting the over-under at 60 seems like is that an indication that it could go either way?
Well, a lot of the games prior to New Year's Eve generally tend to go over because they have nothing to lose. There's no pressure on their games. And the coaches, you give them an extra 4 weeks to prepare for. They're going to pull out trick plays and run things they haven't run before. So we generally see games before New Year's Eve go over the total. You see those totals be higher. Then once it gets to New Year's Day, now there's a lot of pressure on those games. They mean a lot. They're going to play a little bit tighter. So we've seen the New Year's Day bowl games generally go under. So I think before the bowls, you'll see those. I think Vegas generally tacks on another 3 or 4 points to each game.
That's very interesting indeed. Next game is the Independence Bowl with UL Monroe against Ohio from the MAC. Now, this is in Shreveport, Louisiana, so obviously it favors Louisiana Monroe. They're an 8-4 school. So is Ohio, and they were undefeated under Frank Solich until they took a trip down to Red Hawk country in Miami and went up against that great quarterback and were in for a rude awakening. How do you see this one?
I think it's an interesting matchup, but I do like UL Monroe in this for a couple of reasons. First of all, early in the year, UL Monroe, of course, knocked off Arkansas, nearly knocked off Auburn, nearly knocked off Baylor. Then they lost their quarterback for a few games, Colton Browning. Now he's back in the lineup and healthy, so I think you're going to see ULM playing its best. They have an excellent head coach in Todd Berry. Now, Ohio, of course, has an excellent head coach in Frank Solich. But towards the end of the season, this is an Ohio team that sometimes was playing without as many as 10 starters due to the fact they're one of the most beat-up teams in the NCAA. Now, they're still going to be beat up for this game. They could be missing 3 starting offensive linemen. A good portion of their defensive players are going to be out, and the injury list is still heavy for Ohio U. I think if you took that Ohio U team that opened up the year 6-0, the one that beat Penn State, had them 100% healthy, I would probably pick Ohio U in this one. But due to the fact it's in Louisiana and Ohio U is banged up, I like UL Monroe to win this. And as you can see by the checklist says ULM by 5.5. I might like them even more than that. They've got one of the big home field edges out there.
All right, next is the Minnicky Car Care Bowl, which is in Texas, and it features Texas Tech with a 7-5 season against a Big Ten opponent, the Golden Gophers of Minnesota, who are only 6-6.
Yeah, and Minnesota comes into this game, and their last 2 games of the regular season, they had 283 yards offense and 18 first downs. That's in 8 quarters. They had 18 first downs. That's about a good half for Texas Tech. And Seth Dagey, the quarterback for TT, rates a massive edge at the QB spot. Their running backs led by Kenny Williams, a large edge. The receivers, a large edge. And how about on the offensive line? Texas Tech only allows 3.2% sacks. They get 4.5 yards per carry. They got big boys across the board. Texas Tech has my number 17 rated offense in the country, a top 20 offense. Minnesota, meanwhile, comes in with a bottom 20 offense. I rated number 106 in the country. They went to a freshman at quarterback in Phillip Thomas, and they have struggled down the stretch. Now, defensively, I give Minnesota a chance. They're about equal with Texas Tech. As you can see by the checklist, they even give Minnesota a half edge overall on the defense. I gave that to the defensive backs. Special teams are close. Schedule slight edge at Texas Tech. But the home edge, this game's being played in Reliance Stadium. Texas Tech will have the fan edge. Texas Tech also has the matchup edge. Minnesota doesn't run the ball well. They don't pass it well. Texas Tech, on the other hand, does both well with the defenses close. Add it all up. Even without Tommy Tuberville, who surprisingly left for the Cincinnati job, I think Texas Tech gets it done here and comes out with a big win.
Next is the Fight Hunger Bowl, which is in San Francisco. Arizona State, almost a 2-touchdown favorite against Navy. It's quite a distance between Phoenix and San Francisco, obviously, but it's a heck of a lot closer than Annapolis. But I would venture to say that Navy's going to be well represented with fans there, Phil, because isn't there a big naval base in San Francisco and a lot of ships? So the Navy, the midshipman's going to get some support here.
Yeah, I think a big naval base in San Diego. I'm not sure if in San Francisco, but there very well could be as well. And wherever they are going to travel. And there's no doubt Navy will have the crowd edge in this one. Navy will have the intangible edge. Folks always root for them. And this one used to be called the Kraft Fight Hunger Bowl. It might still be called that. I'm not sure if Kraft is still the sponsor. But it is a big difference, Bruce, than the bowl games of the 60s and the 70s, where we had the Orange Bowl, the Sugar Bowl, all those great names like that. Now we've got names like this. But here's the thing when you line these guys up. You look at Arizona State, talent-wise, you give the edge to them practically at every single position across the board. In fact, that's what we do here in the checklist, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I don't know if there's a Navy starter on defense that would be on the second string of Arizona State's defense. They have a lot of talent on that side of the ball. But Navy runs that cut blocking, and generally when you've got an athletic defensive line loaded with some NFL prospects like Will Sutton, their fine nose guard, they get a little worried about their knees when they face a cut blocking team like Navy, and you see them be a little concerned. Also, Arizona State's one of the nation's leader in sacks. Well, if you're running up the field against the option, that's when you get beat. You leave gaping holes, and then Navy can hit those holes, and all of a sudden it's a 40 or 50-yard play. So now Arizona State's going to have to run gap control defense, and I don't know if they're really suited to that. So the intangibles are on Navy's side, the fact that they're going to come to play regardless. Arizona State, you don't know that they're going to come to play 100% in this game. Todd Graham has engineered some bowl blowouts, but I got to like the underdog here. Navy's a 2-touchdown underdog in this. I think they'll keep it closer than expected.
Next one is the Pinstripe Bowl, and yeah, you guessed it. It's at Yankee Stadium in New York City, and geographically, the organizers like this matchup because of the proximity of the two opponents. Syracuse against West Virginia. Boy, what could have been for Geno Smith and company with the Mountaineers this year, but my goodness, did it turn around for them, Phil?
Yeah, it sure did. They opened up the season 6-0 or 5-0 or 6-0, something like that, and it looked like they were going places off that big win over Texas, and then 5 straight losses, all in back-to-back-to-back weeks, and it seemed like the losses got bigger and bigger each and every week. And now they're going to be playing outdoors. In the 2 years of the Pinstripe Bowl, we've seen a lot of winds, a lot of cold, a lot of snow. That might affect the precision passing offense that West Virginia runs with Geno Smith and his 2 outstanding receivers in Tavon Austin and Stedman Bailey. Syracuse is a gutty team. Doug Marrone, each of his 3 years in the Big East at Syracuse, has had his team produce better than I expected. And this year, once again. And earlier this year, when they played in New York against USC, Ryan Nassib and company played a great game. In fact, in the fourth quarter, they were down by 1 score at one point. So I think Syracuse will be coming with a lot of energy. Syracuse has already played in the Pinstripe Bowl, so they're a veteran in this game. And when we look at the checklist on the screen, it's pretty much even. I rate West Virginia about 1 checkmark advantage. Holgerson will be there. there. They did blow out their opponent last year, but I think it's different conditions, different type of opponent this year. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Syracuse pulled the upset.
Wow, so there's a reason why it's only a 4-point differential with West Virginia. I've got to ask you about the over-under in this one because it's approximately at 74, and this is the highest total that Vegas has listed of the bowl games that I've asked you about today. You still, because it's before all the major bowl games, think that this has a tendency to go over too?
I think the two offenses, if they played this in the Carrier Dome, I would love the over. It'd be nice, clean conditions. Ryan Nassib's an excellent passer. Geno Smith is an excellent passer. This is one where you go to weather.com the day before the game. You see what the winds are. If it's windy, I would lean towards the under in this one. If it's clear weather, I'd lean towards the over.
All right, the next game, and this is an old traditional bowl game, the Alamo Bowl in San Antonio, Texas. Davy Crockett and Colonel Travis and Jim Bowie and company go visit the Alamo student bodies. And this is a very good matchup. This is Oregon State against Texas. They're both going to be, I would imagine, well represented, even though Texas, this is in their backyard. Texas was kind of an underachieving team this year. Oregon State over the years has always proved to be dangerous, and you can't take them for granted. Even though Oregon laid it on them, you and I discussed that a lot. Is certainly the week before Oregon not been upset by Stanford, it may have been a different scenario. But I'm real curious to see how you look at this matchup.
Yeah, it's an Oregon State team that went into UCLA, came out with the win, went into a strong Arizona, got the win. They went into BYU and got the win. Mike Riley every year has his team basically overachieve what I forecast. And this year they were actually picked 6th in the Pac-12 South by the media. I had them higher than everybody else at 4th, but even 4th underestimated where they were. You look at the type of play that Oregon State got this year, and very strong at receiver. They've got 2 NFL caliber receivers in Wheaton and Cooks. They've got Woods at running back. On the defensive side of the ball, they've got one of the best cornerbacks in the country in Jonathan Poyer, one of the best linemen in the country in Crichton. And this is a very good Oregon State team. With Riley there, you know they're going to get the most out of their units. I do think Texas is going to have the crowd edge in the Alamo Bowl. They'll probably have, I give them a 3 checklist edge there. Oregon State traditionally doesn't travel a lot of folks to a bowl game. So I think the fact that it's in Texas will have the local people rooting for Texas as well. Now, the two teams are close talent-wise. I have Oregon State number 22 on defense, and despite the fact Texas's defense got lit up early in the year, over the last 5 games of the year, they actually had their opponents to 85 yards below their season average. I rate them the number 29 defense. So offensively, I think the quarterback that makes less mistakes will be Texas's quarterback. And Case McCoy or David Ash, I believe Ash will get the start here. Mannion had 2 games this year against Washington and Oregon where he threw 4 interceptions, and that came back to cost him. So overall, the two teams are fairly close, but I'm going to give the home edge to Texas, a little bit of the talent edge to Texas. And Texas is an underdog in a non-BCS bowl game for the first time in 20-plus years.
Wow.
I think that extra added motivation goes on Texas's side. I like the Longhorns here.
Fascinating. All right, this is the last one I'm going to ask you about this week. The Buffalo Wild Wings Bowl. This is in Tempe, Arizona. Big Ten, Michigan State, only 6-6. What an underachieving year. They were considered at the beginning of the season as a very dangerous team. And in the Legends division of the Big Ten, they take on TCU. TCU playing a pretty tough schedule this year, obviously, 7-5. And the over-under in this is the lowest that I've asked you about so far, only 41.
Yeah, and it deserves to be a low total in this game because if you look at Michigan State this year, they're a team that has lived on the defense and got by despite their offense. Their offense is basically hand the ball off to Le'Veon Bell. Le'Veon Bell only averages 4.2 yards per carry, and then their quarterback play has been poor and inconsistent. But defense, there's no questioning that defensive front 7. And TCU, you know, Gary Patterson did a heck of a job with the Frogs this year. During the course of the spring, they lost 2 key defensive players from that front 7. I expected their defense to be weaker than it was. but they overperformed. They lose their starting quarterback, Casey Pahal, midseason, but stepping into it is Terrence Boykin, and he had a great second half of the year. So I actually think TCU, when you look at the offenses, I give TCU a slight edge at quarterback, Michigan State an edge at running back, Michigan State an edge on the offensive line. Very slight edge here to Michigan State. Defensively, edge goes to Michigan State as well. Now, the turf and crowd, I figure both are going to be pretty much about the same for this one, so no edge there. Special teams, slight edge to TCU. I think these two teams are very close. It should be a low-scoring ball game. Big Ten's not going to get a lot of wins this bowl season. Let's call for one here. I'll take Michigan State, and I believe they're a slight underdog.
You know, that's funny you said that. You read my mind, because I was going to follow up your preview of this game by saying that this may be the only game the Big Ten can win.
Yeah, the rest of the games, a lot of the games are a large underdog in their games, and they're taking on a lot better competition. And, here's the interesting thing, Bruce. TCU last year was in the Mountain West Conference. So even though they were an underdog to a Big 12 team here, just a year ago they'd be an underdog to a Mountain West team. Got to think Michigan State will be motivated. And 5 of their losses this year were by combined 13 points.
Right. Yeah, I like Michigan State here, too. They better win to save face for the conference, because there's some rough matchups coming up. All right, Phil Steele, PhilSteele.com. The complete bowl guide is available to you right now, PhilSteele.com, and still plenty of time until that very first bowl game to enter his contest of the College Bowls. We'll be back.